Great, and thank you so much. Welcome to the second panel. I'm Harry Surden. I'm the Associate Director here at Stanford's CodeX Center, and I'm also a law professor at the University of Colorado Law School. So for this panel, we invite you to be imaginative and playful. It is the year 2045. We are now celebrating CodeX's 40-year anniversary. And it's been 40 years, it's 2045, and we still haven't found a use for the blockchain. But in 2045, we have solved the problem of access to justice in law. So thanks to a combination of AI, changes in law, lawyering, society, support for the underserved, lawyers are much more effective, much more inclusive, and much more reliable than they were way back in 2025. And on this 40-year anniversary, we want to look back and say, how did we get there? How did we get so far compared to 2025? Back in 2025, there were so many issues. There was no right to legal counsel in civil cases. Over 80% of Americans with a civil legal problem, whether it's family law, immigration law, landlord-tenant law, et cetera, could not afford or could not find a lawyer. In the private sector, many lawyers refused to adopt the tools or the practices or the business models that could best suit their clients for cost-effective, efficient, reliable lawyering. But somehow, we managed to solve it all by the year 2045. And we even managed to preserve democracy and the rule of law all the way through the second term of President Taylor Swift. So in this panel, we want to pave a path to the future, looking forward from the years from 2025 to 2045, and how we manage to solve many of society's most difficult societal problems in law. Joining me to look back to the future is a terrific group of expert panelists. Starting to my left, we have Danielle Benecke, who's the founder and global head of Baker McKenzie's machine learning practice. Next, we have Margaret Hagan, who's the executive director of the Legal Design Lab at Stanford Law School. Next, we have Dan Hoadley, the head of research and development at VLEX and a member of the UK Civil Council, Justice Council for AI. And last but not least, Rennie Huang, who's Deputy General Counsel and Head of Litigation and Regulatory for OpenAI. So please join me in welcoming this excellent panel. So my first question is going to go to Margaret. So Margaret, it's 2045. We've solved access to justice thanks to largely to the people like you guys in the room back in 2025. But before we get there, remind us, what was it like back in 2025 when access to justice was still riddled with institutional, procedural, financial, and capability-based barriers? Can you take us back and paint a picture the way things were and what the barriers were to effective lawyering and access?
Great, thank you, Harry. Let's travel back in time. So if we come back to the year 2025, and we're in the United States, and we kind of zoom in like we're in the movies and we're flashing back, let's picture a person who's just come back to their apartment that they're renting, and there's a piece of paper on their door, and it's a notice. It's from their property management company, and it says that they're behind on rent, they haven't fulfilled their lease, and they have 3 days to figure it out, or else a lawsuit is going to be filed against them in court. Or let's pan over and go to a different movie scene, and there we're in someone's home, and a couple, they're arguing, they're coming into conflict, they're thinking, should we get a divorce, or how do we deal with our kids? Or maybe it's a different conflict. Maybe I need a guardianship for my grandchild, or there's a conservatorship issue. Or maybe let's pan over and look at someone who's recently out of the criminal justice system and they're trying to get their life back on track. They need to get their driver's license restored. They want to get custody of their kids. They're trying to clean their records so that when they apply for jobs or housing, that they're likely to get access to those things. Right now, in any of those situations, there are many of the barriers that I think, Harry, you already touched on. Informational barriers. How do you even figure out what to do next? So whether you're facing that scary piece of paper or a lawsuit has been filed against you, what are you supposed to do? Is there a certain piece of paper you're supposed to fill out? What should you put in those boxes? How do you get that piece of paper into the court on time so that the clerk will actually accept it? Tremendously hard to navigate. You're having to deal with legalese. You might be incredibly stressed out. English might not be your first language. All kinds of barriers to be able to participate in the legal system and protect your rights. There's also might be barriers around how overwhelming the following steps are. Maybe you have to engage with a Goliath-like figure who knows a lot about you or people like you and has a lot of technology tools to kind of participate and fill in all those forms or to try to strategize and get you to sign something. You, in that David situation, will have a big barrier to being able to kind of participate and get justice when you're faced against a repeat player with a lot of data and technology tools. So that's why we see, if we go back to the year 2025, so many people not being able to get access to justice. So not being able to fill in paperwork, not getting their day in court, and often just avoiding the system altogether, meaning they're not applying, or they're trying to apply, but they try to get legal aid and they can't get help. Many of those people might just drop away and say, this is too hard, so I'm not going to fight the lawsuit, or I'm not going to apply for benefits, or I'm not going to kind of use legal counsel to try to resolve this dispute. And that's where we see people losing out on key things that will make housing, employment, family, and their finances more stable. This is why the justice gap is so problematic way back in 2025.
Let me ask the rest of the panel, what do you remember about 2025 that was inhibiting access to justice, either for the underserved or even just generally effective and reliable counsel for clients? Yeah, Dan?
You want to jump in on that one?
Yes.
So I'm British, so I'm going to start in a very snarky vein because that's my kind of default mode. But before I do that, can I just say it's brilliant to be here. I'm so pleased that there's so many people in this room I've learned from for such a long time. The big problem in 2025 was that the legal tech community didn't know how to talk about legal tech. And it gravitated into this endless rut where all it could do was talk about process values, talking about making things more efficient, talking about making things faster. And those goals were almost universally anchored in the idea that you could put more money in the pockets of a law firm partner. And for the people that are needed to bring about the change that we now see in 2045 that helps the people that Margaret just described, the conversation needs to shift away from process values to outcome values. We need to be able to think and speak concretely about how we can use technology to make things better, to increase quality. And so that would be my two penneth at this point.
Great. Rennie, did you want to weigh in here?
Sure. It's hard to follow a good accent, but no, thank you guys all for having me here. You know, thinking back to, we're play acting, right? So thinking back to 2025, and even now, honestly, I think when you think about access to justice, a lot of the fundamental problem, I think, is access to information, right? Just, are you aware of what the laws are? Is it accessible? Do you understand it? And I think over the past 20 years, again, putting that hat on, I think we've done great strides in that. I think AI, tools like AI, technologies like AI, democratize information, access to information, to understand what's out there, what's accessible, what's available, and to actually make it make sense for everyday people. So that's a very rosy picture of where we are.
Great. Danielle, do you want to weigh in?
Sure, and I might riff on a couple of the points here that kind of shift to a different part of the legal market, which is the market that I serve, which is large, global, complex organizations. And I think if we start from the very obvious premise, right, that we're in a clear technology paradigm shift right now, and in any paradigm shift, you get the opportunity to create value, right? Sometimes new kinds of value, sometimes value in different places. And I think what we are going to see over coming years, and Megan and Roland have set us the impossible task of predicting what's going to happen in 20 years. It's hard to predict what's going to happen in the next quarter, right? But I think the one golden thread that is going to remain true is that the players, wherever you are in the market, the players who are focused on delivering value, creating value, they're going to win, right? Create value, you win. And then when you think about how do you create value, you obviously need to orient around, well, who are your clients, right? And what are the high value problems that they're looking to solve, right? From my clients, these are organizations that are operating in what I would call edge of chaos conditions, right? You only have to look at the last week to think about the layers of instability. You have geopolitical risk, you have fragile supply chains, you have regulatory complexity and fragmentation, and increasingly a lot of that regulatory complexity is coming in through these sort of AI technologies that we're bringing into the market. So these are not, to Dan's point, these are not narrow, siloed legal questions or capabilities. These are enterprise level risks, right? And they translate into massive, massive legal complexity. And so part of my role, so I lead applied AI at one of the biggest firms in the world, probably the biggest by some measures, and part of my job is to, one, help clients solve these kinds of problems, but to talk to them about their AI strategy and their stack of capabilities to support this kind of problem solving. And they're saying to me, it's not really contract redlining that's keeping me up at night, right? It's about, these really high-level existential risks. And so what do they really need? They need clarity at speed and under pressure, right? And you're not going to your point, you're not going to get that from the faster memo, right? Like, all of that stuff needs to be done. And I applaud everybody who's operating at those levels of the stack, but we need to go much further beyond that to actually deliver and realize the full value of this technology shift.
Great, thank you. So next question for Danielle. So
Okay.
again, it's 2045, and you've now spent over 20 years building AI-enabled legal services in law firms. So looking back, how did the law firm business model change from 2025? Did we get rid of the billable hour? Did the 6-minute increments go down to 3-minute increments?
Yeah.
How did firms mostly optimize? Did they optimize their old workflows? Did some of them manage to rethink how they deliver goods and services using technology from the bottom up? So how do things look today?
Yeah, so I think we are already starting to see a fork in the road that different firms are going to travel down. I think we are seeing pretty strong divergence in approaches. You see some focus that are really focused on the automation of existing service lines, using AI to optimize what they do now. And to Dan's point, there is value in that, right? But it's not transformation, right? That's table stakes, and that's just going to be the expectation for everybody. Other firms, and openly, this is kind of where we're kind of placing our bet a little bit more, started to ask the fundamental question of, like, what problems can we solve now that were previously unsolvable? And I think that mindset takes you down a very, very different path. The other point, too, is the capability stack to support that kind of problem at solving at scale. If you're really serious about it, you need a very different capability stack than what we're seeing in the market right now. And I think what we're seeing in the market, I think more firms are maturing to this approach, and I would say big law, big four, consulting, and sort of other adjacent knowledge industries, is you need a layered, vertically integrated AI architecture, right? A single vendor partnership, or sort of like a flat horizontal, we do everything legal layer is just not going to cut it for that kind of problem solving, right? So if that's what you want to do, you need something a little bit different. And you've already seen some, clear market shifts. There've been like big four firms that sort of came out of the gate with a single vendor partnership, very quickly pivoted to a multi-vendor strategy, and now they're really focused on their own infrastructure and saying, well, actually, we have our own agent architecture, right, to support problem solving for our clients and our service lines, right? So I think there is going to be a pretty significant shift in that direction for the firms that are really serious about it. And what does that stack look like? At a high level, it's like baseline cloud and data infrastructure, enterprise productivity, AI, I'd put sort of Copilot and its competitors in that category. For many firms, it's just kind of switching that on and realizing those general productivity gains. And to be honest, I posted about this earlier today. We and others have done some benchmarking. I think a lot of the sort of horizontal legal AI is kind of at par with what you're seeing in that general productivity layer, right? I think what I really want to see from the market is more and more vertical capability, and I think we will see more tools that are focused on very specific verticals of work, that are laser focused on things like speeding up a deal. That, those are things that are really, really going to move the needle. But I also think critically, firms are realizing that they actually need their own internal applied AI teams that are building on top of all of these vendor layers, building services that are tailored to specific clients and specific needs. The one final point I just want to make here is the commercial model obviously has to evolve too, right? As you say, Harry. All of this capability, these sort of verticalized capabilities, needs to be supported by a commercially sustainable model. That model has to make sense for clients. It has to make sense for firms and other players in the ecosystem. And the obvious fact is you cannot price machine speed services by the hour, right? So I do think we are in the paradigm shift that will finally crack that open, but we need to co-design business models with our clients, right? Because the value of services delivered is increasingly around decision velocity, strategic clarity, and risk mitigation, not time, right? And so we're seeing peer firms sort of more actively pilot these kinds of business models and sort of like very early signals of what that might look like. Like in my own service, set of services that we sell, we're more and more pricing on a kind of units of analysis basis, right? So if you have a complex multi-jurisdictional cyber incident, and our service includes some agentic workflows and other AI-enabled workflows that can kind of help compress certain activities into like seconds and minutes. How do you charge for that? Because there's a speed premium and there's a value premium. So kind of aligning with clients on like, are we going to charge maybe per unit of analysis? We can charge per scenario, because sometimes in these incidents you might be mapping like 1 million or more different scenarios. So that's where the real work, in my view, is going to be done. There's a ton of talk about AI models and technology, which is critical, but there is not nearly enough talk about commercial models. A lot of talk about practice of law, not much talk about the business of law, in my opinion.
I love that. Those are incredible points. And just to reflect some themes that I've heard, one idea is focusing at the higher level on the problem solving, having a problem solving mindset, which reflects some of the themes that Dan said about outcome quality rather than individual deliverables. Now, you had said that technology can help you solve new problems that were difficult to solve before. Can you think off the top of your head an example of one such problem?
Sure, yeah, I can even share something that we worked on before the current paradigm shift. So there were a number of firms and vendors out there in the market that were working with GPT and bringing them into different products and service lines. So this is kind of before ChatGPT, but we had a technology client facing some pretty serious risks around their supply chain, around the Russia sanctions crisis, and thinking about scenario modeling around what might happen in Asia, right, around Taiwan and China. And so for that particular client, this was like very early primitive work with like GPT-3 and BERT kind of like stuck together. But what we did was basically mine a bunch of data about their supply chain that they didn't even know, right? About second level, third level vendors and sub-suppliers, and help them pinpoint hotspots of risk in their massive, very complicated global supply chain, and then you kind of layer over the regulatory analysis, right? So that's a fundamentally different service that was just not possible, but for those sort of, at least now, sort of fairly primitive models, right? We're in an entirely different ball game right now. And so one thing, like this is just something I'm literally working on like as this panel is happening, is I'll take the cyber example. We have a large client cybersecurity incident. We have thousands of affected individuals. We have many millions of data points. We have tools, like great tools like Relativity, that are really, really good at identifying in data that's sort of being breached, PII that's implicated in that breach, right? So now you can understand that there are people whose PII has been impacted. The next step you need to take with the client is figure out, now that that's happened, what regulators around the world do we need to report to? What individuals do we need to notify about this? And when you're dealing with millions of individuals across like 40 plus jurisdictions, that traditionally would have taken maybe at least a week, right, of very manual, laborious work by many lawyers. So we've kind of compressed that down to these agentic workflows that can run in tandem. And the service difference now is we're not just compressing that work, we're actually running multiple scenarios as new information emerges about the incident. And the client can also run different scenarios around things like, hey, if I'm going to take a more aggressive approach to risk and I want to say that this is not an acquisition of data, it's sort of an access of data, or if I want to say, really, this is not a material risk of harm in this incident, it's not that kind of, I don't want to characterize that. You can actually model out what your regulatory reporting position looks like as you're doing. So we're finding now with cyber incidents, we're actually running multiple scenarios on the fly for these clients, and we can do that in seconds and minutes. The other really interesting thing is you bring in new categories of information. So we have a module that's focused on the regulatory piece, and we have sort of agents doing that. And then we have a module that's focused on the, have you contractually committed to any reporting obligations that might be buried somewhere in your vendor contracts, right? So you start to get all of these layers of insight that were previously impossible in really, really compressed timelines when the client's under pressure. Like, I think that dramatically changes the nature of the service from a much more reactive one to a much more proactive one.
Those are great examples. Let me throw the same question out to the rest of the panel. How did law firms change looking back from 2045? Dan?
This is a really horrible question. And I've been thinking about this kind of since the last week. And every time I hear someone speak today, I keep changing my answer. How did law firms change? Well, I think the answer to that is the relationship that existed in 2025 between very large law firms, such as Baker McKenzie, DLA Piper, Wilson. The relationship between large law firms and the vendor community was completely dysfunctional. And it was dysfunctional in various ways that affected the meaningful adoption of these solutions in fairly material ways. The first was that on the vendor side, there was almost uniformly a complete lack of discipline in being honest about the capabilities of the products they were selling. And that was a fatal issue because it made it impossible to build trust. And I say this as a vendor. It's a problem that I see, and I kind of obsess at the moment about the way we talk about these products. Like I spend way too much time on LinkedIn, kind of pulling the little hair I have left on my head out, kind of despairing. So that's the first problem. The second problem, this goes to a point that Danielle made, is that you have a small cluster of vendors who are trying to position themselves as one platform to rule them all, which has never been a realistic offering, and I don't think ever will be. I completely agree with Danielle that we want to see an increase in kind of vertical precision solutions. But this one platform to rule them all phenomenon created another problem that makes things in 2025 really difficult for big law firms, which is, what problems do I want to solve first, given that I have a barrage of vendors coming towards me saying that their product can solve everything? And what that resulted in was just a complete lack of focus. So that's problem number two. And problem number three was this kind of insidious mechanism at play where all but the most sophisticated law firms with the types of firms that Danielle works at, where you have a very strong internal technical capability that gives you as a customer a very high level of expertise. For firms that lacked that internal capacity, they were caught in a FOMO trap, where every single day they opened LinkedIn and saw some enterprise law firm partner with some other legal tech vendor saying how great and all singing, all dancing this particular partnership was. And what happened was adoption, to the extent that it actually happened, was being driven not so much by the clear identification of problems to solve and outcomes to reach, but by a feeling that you just had to act and buy something.
Well, those are all great problems, but just remind me, how did we solve them?
Well, we solved them by being honest about the problems first and getting it out there and being clear and direct that in 2025, the way we talk about these products, the way we talk about the opportunities was pretty crap.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else want to weigh in on that question? Margaret, Rennie? Margaret, go ahead.
Well, I would say in the smaller world of legal aid providers or kind of the everyday law firms, I think we are going to get stuck on the slower fork in the road path, Danielle, of just automating and taking off a lot of that boring paperwork, clerical tasks that severely limit how many people can actually get help at those key moments facing eviction, debt, family, traffic, and reentry problems. So I think the clerical stuff, even if we get on that path of reducing and automating those kinds of paperwork burdens and informational things, I think there'll be at least some of that wonderful outcome of reducing the justice gap, more people getting expert help. I'd love to see that more ambitious thing of what do we actually want? What is that better future aside from automating our current workflows? So in that optimistic how we get there, I think if we have a national federated effort, and I include Canada, Australia, UK, and beyond in that kind of federated effort, where each legal aid group is not spending its very limited budget developing its own stack and its own agent that it's not going to be able to maintain in 3 years after its grant funding runs out. Instead, they pool their money and they develop common tech stacks and incentivize vendors to come into this marketplace and then can tailor it locally. But a lot more collaboration, and then boom, in 2045, they have an amazing ability to serve everyone who comes to their door.
Okay, those are great observations. First, I'm hearing at the nonprofit level, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that doesn't even necessarily involve the most advanced AI that could really help access to justice. And I'm also hearing that we as a society have to care more and devote more resources towards solving this problem. There's a lot of, rather than having one-off solutions.
Yes.
Rennie, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I can just add from the in-house perspective and how, from the in-house company interacts with law firms and the change we would see in 20 years. I think probably in two areas. One is the necessary and desired skill set you want to see from the firms you're working with, from the associates. I think, right now, the ability to use LexisNexis or Westlaw is a necessary skill. 20 years from now, it may be whatever AI tools you need to use, right? 20 years ago, I guess, in 2045 right now, I'm not sure anyone knows what a blue book is, or if you ever have to learn that, right? Because I think the technology, the tools will advance to a certain extent that you'll be optimizing for a different skill set or looking for a different skill set from the folks you work with. And I think that'll be an evolution, primarily I think at the social level, but that'll be evolution in terms of the skills you need to be successful at law firms, at least from the client perspective. I think the other piece to think about as well too is how clients or companies look for staffing from their firms, right? I think the days of 30, 40, 50 person associate teams doing document review probably won't make sense at that point, right? There'll be so many other innovations, other ways to do it, and you'll up-level kind of how you staff your teams and think about what kind of work you need your firms to do. And I think as with any technology, I think those are the evolution, the progression you'll see. And I think AI will very distinctly and quickly move us in a certain direction.
Great, thank you. So the next question is for Rennie. So Rennie, it's 2045, and congratulations, 22 years at OpenAI. If you can remember back in November 2022, OpenAI released a large language model named ChatGPT 3.5, which kickstarted the modern AI large language model revolution. At that time, it showed promise towards doing legal work. There were subsequent models released that got better and better every year. In your own task as in-house legal counsel, what advancements over the last 20 years finally caused you to start adopting large language models in your own legal workflow in terms of reliability, in terms of accuracy, and how did that change how you work?
Yeah, so it's 2045, so it's been like 45 years since I studied computer science down on the other side of campus. So I'm going to try to explain the best I can from a technical level and then talk about from how it impacts kind of the legal profession. I think, over the past several decades, I think, one of the key breakthroughs for ChatGPT or any kind of large language model is that deep learning worked, right? The ability to, to predict with scale and with the kind of resources like an algorithm that actually looks at the underlying data, understands the distribution of the data, the rules underneath it, and come up with really good answers. And we realized that by adding more compute, more data, more resources toward this and dedicating that over the past several years or decades, it just got really, really good, right? AI found a lot of good ways to solve problems for us, problems that we couldn't solve before. And that's the progression, evolution, I think, honestly, over the past 20, 40 years, whatnot, right? That we got this product out here that really helped do things we couldn't do before, enhance our everyday lives, make improvements, and kind of supplement what we do. And so as AI got better at scale, the question that was posing, how does that impact us as lawyers? I think not really. From the like AI is not going to replace lawyers. I think we are so good at our jobs, we've created arcane rules that will never be displaced, right? Only lawyers will. It'll be very hard to kind of push us aside. But I do think what we'll see is areas where it makes us do our work better, more efficient, kind of faster, smarter. And to the kind of the other point, kind of up-leveling a lot of what we do, right? So, right now, I think 20 years ago, I used ChatGPT to help my 8th grader with their math homework because it was really hard, or to tell my my 2nd grader bedtime stories. And honestly, that's a win already. I could have stopped there, right? But we'll see. You're going to see now AI do so many other things. We're going to see personal AI assistants, right, helping you with everyday tasks. You're going to see teams of AI assistants, virtual experts, helping you solve bigger problems. And you're going to see AI systems that actually kind of self-perpetuate and make themselves better, right? And so that's the direction we're going. And from a in-house, I'm going to answer your question eventually. From an in-house legal perspective, you'll look at those tasks that AI can really solve for you. So for example, legal research, right? We touched on this before. The ability to do deep research with AI model. Right now, hopefully by 2045, it won't hallucinate. It'll actually be trained on case law and opinions and understand judges and tendencies. You actually have a really strong model that can actually do a lot of first-level legal research for you. You'll still need a lawyer to understand it, articulate it, educate, understand what the strategy is behind that, but you can get pretty far. Legal investigation response, right? The ability to go through a large corpus of data and find answers to questions, or what have I said before in a litigation matter, regulatory matter. I think that'll change fairly quickly with the implementation of AI there. And I think I had one more thing in my notes. Let me check. Oh, and the big one actually, because honestly, the biggest thing for in-house counsel or in-house lawyers is cost, right? Try to drive down cost. And litigation law is legal matters are really, really expensive. And a biggest driver of that is legal discovery. And just imagine, I think, the changes that will happen in legal discovery, right? The ability to go through a huge amount of documents super fast, tagging, identifying hot dogs, privilege coding, kind of less errors in review. All that stuff, at least on our first pass or even second pass review, I think will make a huge difference in our lives.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And inspired by the professor's great keynote, I wonder if we developed the analog to verifiers for legal ideas. So when a large language model is going down an inauspicious path, do we have some sort of verifier that can help nudge it back so it shrinks the search space to something more reliable?
Absolutely.
Yes, okay. Excellent. So let me throw this out to the rest of the panel. What technological developments helped, bridge the access to justice or made lawyers more effective in 2045?
Can I actually just pick up on Margaret's earlier point about, some more of the automation workflows? And, I think it's actually the layering of all that stuff that gets you to the hard problem solving, right? So when I talk about solving problems like cyber incidents, it's actually the layering of all those sort of seemingly more vanilla capabilities, but it's when you verticalize them and laser focus them on a problem, whether it's in the access to justice space or the commercial space, I think that's where you can really, really deliver value. And I think one of the things I've noticed about the current narrative right now. I mean, this happens with every technology paradigm shift. Everybody's trying to figure out, what's going to be the legal OS, right? It's in my view, it's not necessarily a destination platform. It's not one. AI is not one thing, right? I think the legal OS is basically the layered stack ecosystem that all of us are operating in, right? And your stack is going to look completely different, whether you're in-house or in a firm or working in the social impact space. And even within those different segments, and sort of to the point raised in the earlier panel, there are various flavors of that too, right? So I feel like the more we can really focus less on this sort of like almost mythical horizontal legal OS sort of like destination platform, and more thinking about what are the high value problems that need to be solved, and let's create a stack of capabilities that are squarely focused on that. I really do think that's going to be what's going to truly drive transformation in massive segments of legal work.
Terrific. Anyone else want to weigh on this question here? What?
Margaret, do you want to go?
Well, I
Yeah.
will second what Danielle said. I'm really excited about that future. Would you want to answer Harry's question?
I mean, who do we have in mind here with this kind of access to justice kind of utopia that we end up in 2045? Are we imagining the person that, the people that Margaret described at the beginning, or are we talking about a different type of persona?
I think both. So I think we're imagining a future where both the access to justice for underserved community has been solved, and for the served community who are getting maybe costly or inefficient lawyering today are getting excellent, productive problem solving from lawyers using some combination of technology and societal change.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked, I suppose, I wanted to kind of try and build a thread between some of the things we're saying over here with what Reddy just said. So, and here's a big problem that over the last 15 years we've kind of spoken about a lot, but kind of haven't really done anything tangible to fix. Consider the scenario: I am an unrepresented litigant. I'm dealing potentially with a complex legal issue that's come at me from nowhere. The first thing I need to do is be able to kind of understand what the law is, which implies that I have access to the material that constitutes the law. And for OpenAI to kind of build deep research, to do legal research, they need access to the law to train on. But the reality is, in the UK, in the US, in Canada, in Australia, that level of universal access to the constituents of what the law is uneven and favours companies like VLEX, companies like Thomson Reuters, companies like LexisNexis. So to kind of get to that utopia point where an average person can answer a legal research question themselves using ChatGPT, you need to first solve the problem of the access to the data. And that's kind of, I think that's a difficult one, but if the outcome is to be able to empower people to answer their own legal research questions, then we need to kind of be kind of realistic about the path of actual things we need to solve to get us there. And I think that's the one example that keeps coming up. How do you democratize access to the law itself?
Yeah, this is a great point. And again, it gets to the idea that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that doesn't have to do with the frontier technology, just basic access to information, maybe reforming unauthorized practice of law, having more availability of non-lawyer legal representatives, kind of that we're seeing a lot of experimentation. Anyone else want to weigh in on this? All right, so Dan, this is for you, and you've touched on a bunch of these themes already, but we know that lawyers and law firms are not always the quickest to adopt new technologies, even when they're great for the clients. Also, guilty law professors as well. But what finally changed in 2045? The lawyers are using the best technology to help society. What really made that happen?
What made that happen is a realization that law firms and lawyers needed to give themselves the space to experiment and to explore new ideas that may ultimately fail in delivering them value. One of the inhibitors in 2025 and before that was this idea that innovation in a law firm needed in some way to kind of translate to real value. And that if that couldn't be demonstrated fairly quickly, then as a line of work, it probably wasn't worth pursuing. And I say this as someone that used to run a data science team in a pretty innovative law firm. But there's still in 2025 is this dominant kind of mindset that all of the work, all of the exploration has to culminate in some tangible decision that then affects the firm's bottom line in some way, whether it's by giving them the ability to do more work or by allowing them to reduce the amount they write off. When you step back, when you allow yourself to step back and view innovation as a truly strategic, future-facing endeavour that may result in some wins, but may also result in many more losses, then you free yourself up to begin to actually deliver change over a realistic period of time. Because there is low-hanging fruit, but ultimately for law firms to transform, they need to transform their way of thinking about the resource they bring in to do that exploration and to understand what problems there are at the firms and the mechanisms that they might have available to begin to solve them. But to kind of make peace with the fact that you're not going to do any of that overnight. You're not going to do it all in one quarter or maybe two. You need to give yourself a longer run-up, and you need to allow yourself to fail sometimes.
I love that. That's a great point. So the law firms became more experimental, more risk tolerant, had longer time horizons, and invested in themselves with a known rate of failure. And do you think, did the partnership model contribute to that? Every dollar going to R&D is a dollar coming out of somebody's pocket.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, this was an issue, for me personally, where when BERT came out, for example, and we were trying to get access to GPUs to run it. Actually making that case and answering the question, well, what are you going to do with it once you've got it running? And the answer was, we don't really know, but we're going to learn things along the way, and we're going to become more intelligent customers if we do this work. And so the payoff builds up really incrementally, but it's tough to convince a partner just to let you muck around with a new model and fire up a bunch of GPUs for the sake of trying to figure out whether or not it may ultimately have value.
I love that. Well, let me open this up to the rest of the panel. How did we get lawyers to embrace experimentation and change even at the expense of short-term profits?
So I think one of the main points is because of the incredible work of Rennie's company and others in the space, it is so much easier, right? Like even taking sort of one of the more boring, easier workflows that we have. So we have for a while now had this kind of AI-enabled merger control analysis workflow, which really compresses the time that it takes our firm to make snap decisions on whether in an M&A context or other transactional context, we need to comply with certain merger control laws around the world. Like we've had that capability for some time, but it was because of the material step change in capability with the O-series models in particular, with the 4.0 and 01, that's kind of unlocked cases like that for us. So, and in a way, again, because of the incredible work of companies like OpenAI, the technology unlock and the ease with which you can access that through your own Azure environment or whatever cloud environment you use is truly, truly paradigm shifting. Because in our case, for something like that, it's like you just take one of those models off the shelf, you bring in a currency converter, you bring in your merger control analysis playbook, right? And actually the hard part now isn't the technology part, right? I think that's also the main psychological shift that I think most law firms and others need to make, is the technology bit actually isn't that hard when it comes to certain types of workflows. The real challenge and the real value is actually coming through getting in the right expertise and getting in the right domain data. And I think the other really interesting mindset shift that I'm seeing more firms make too is, at least in that layer of the stack, in the sort of custom bespoke workflows layer where I operate, it's not really about big data, it's actually about small data. It's about super high quality, customized playbooks that tell you exactly what you need in order to execute on, or tell your agents what they need to execute on a workflow. And I think those are some pretty significant unlocks in my part of the ecosystem that is going to lead to hopefully some valuable work.
That's a great point. And one of the points you raised is that a lot of lawyers and law firms may have the mindset of 10 years ago when technological experimentation was going to cost millions of dollars and take years, but now thanks to OpenAI and others, you can iterate much more cheaply, much more quickly, and maybe that mindset needs to catch up. Any other folks want to weigh? Yes, Margaret?
Well, so not for the purpose of profit, but I think what we could see in the access to justice public interest space, so including here legal aid groups, courts and their help centers, local governments, to get to that idealistic 2045 future, we're going to have to see kind of strategic, that intentional design of what does that better future of services and outcomes look like, doing that together, where in some jurisdictions, regions of the country, the courts are opposed to the legal aid groups, they're not connected to the local governments, there's service providers who are completely disconnected. So we need to have all of those players who are trying to serve the same public and get to the same beneficial social outcomes together. And each of those regional clusters then working in that federated way so that, again, we don't end up with the patchwork of random technology in one part of the country that doesn't interoperate and leads to lack of sustainability. But we need all of those kind of multi-stakeholder strategic processes in a region, like in Southern California, or in the Northeast, or in the Pacific Northwest. We need that collaboration, and then we need all of these different regions to be kind of sharing and spreading the great work that they're going to be doing in these particular verticals. So it takes a lot of organization, but at least in this community, there is a lot of openness and I think willingness to share and work together. It just takes that kind of stewardship that right now is lacking.
That's a great point. And before we open it up to questions, you anticipated the next question, which is, imagine we can remember back to 2025, and what were the concrete steps we could have taken in 2026 and 2027 to help get us to the legal justice future of 2045? One thing I just heard, which is more coordination of the technologies at the federal and state level, and being much more intentional about our changes, small incremental changes. Anyone else want to weigh in on what are the steps we could have taken in 2025 to get us there that everyone in this room can partake of?
I think that the key ingredient is stewardship, as Margaret just said. Like I feel like I've been the really kind of like negative, kind of like grumbly person on this panel, but sometimes that's a role I have to play. One of the reasons we've known about a lot of these problems for a long time, and we've been talking about them for a long time too. And part of the reason why we haven't really moved the ground on them is because it's been difficult to locate where ownership really resides in kind of bringing the people together that are actually going to do real things to change. And I think I'm really struggling with this side. I have no answers to it, and I don't know if anyone else does here. But where should that stewardship be located? How should it be financed? What resources should be made available to it, and how do we start thinking about that at a time where it feels like certainly the governments of the US and the UK are going to be disinclined in making material investment in access to justice, because the US government is kind of doing, well, we probably won't speak about that. The UK government is having to kind of like pivot a lot of its investment strategy because we don't know what's going on over here. And so it's really hard. And maybe the answer is it comes from this community, and maybe a really important role for CodeX to play over the next 20 years is to figure out what role it plays itself in the stewardship of kind of improving things on this side of the Atlantic, and we can learn from you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think if the stewardship comes from anywhere, it'll have some connection to the people in this room. So I want to encourage and inspire all of you to take those next steps. All right, let us throw this out to our lovely audience for their questions. Roland, I believe you were the first up.
Thank you much for the panel. Thank you much for the open discussion there. I would like to give it a different spin there towards 2025. We had an interesting presentation from Dan Katz and Dirk Hartung earlier the week about the complexity of the legal system that is increasing. It will increase probably also the next decade further. We see now with a Gen AI unprecedented way of generating text. We see books on Amazon that's just built on a prompt and people publish these things and spam everything. What is the panel's opinion on that one? Will we have longer texts in the future and lawyers just shooting at each other 1,000-page documents because you can generate out of prompts? Because you have now unsolicited data access and you can have memos that are 1,000, 2,000 pages long and the other law firm has to just analyze these ones as well? Or do you think there's a way where we can simplify the approach and come to an essence and not really spam each other?
So I can jump in here because we're helping our clients deal with some of these emerging second-order effects right now. So part of the service lines that I deliver right now is clients who are being hit by AI-generated mass consumer and other claims, right? And so we've had clients who are themselves technology leaders who've come to us and said, hey, we are getting massive hotspots of litigation where the number of claims have gone from tens of claims that could be reviewed internally to thousands of claims overnight. So in areas like GDPR, for instance, right? And so I think that's absolutely right to be thinking about both sides of the coin, right? Because if you're on the client side, you're going to be hit with more and more AI-enabled litigation and legal threat. And I think, Dan has done incredible work over the years on sort of the increasing legal complexity. And I think what we have is we have a problem that is advancing in tandem with the solution, right? Legal complexity, which is obviously a reflection of social, political, economic complexity, is increasing exponentially. And of course, at the same time, we have technology that is also on an exponential curve, technology that can help us parse through and make sense of all that complexity, right? So I do believe in some parts of the legal world, we are going to be in a little bit of an AI war of attrition, and we're already seeing signal of that for sure.
Mini follow-up on that one. That means a law firm that later on has no AI will definitely cannot survive at all, because they have to process that amount of text that comes into their own law firm as well.
Yeah, and it's sort of like the Jay Vaughn's paradox cliche at this point, right? It's like, people were like, oh no, legal work's going to go away. But it's like, legal work's not static, right? Legal work evolves over time. And the nature of legal work, the standard for legal work is just going to grow and grow and grow. And so if people have access to valuable AI models and other resources that help do things faster with deeper and broader insight, there's just going to be more stuff being done, I think.
Yeah, and we saw a perfect example of this with e-discovery around 2010, where the idea was the technology was going to find the needle in the haystack much quicker, but the haystack just kept on growing. We've got a question over here.
Sure. So we had a great conversation about where we want to predict 2045, where we are going to be. But the other question is that where do we want to design the legal services to be in 2045? Because the way that we are going to design it is going to impact how we think about the technology stack, how we think about the policies. So I would love to hear your perspective on, can we change this misalignment of interest that exists right now, for example, with billable hours? So if we decide that we want to change that and we want to design a new system, so then we would have a different approach. So I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
I'm not going to talk about the billable hour or kind of the business structures, but I do think it means getting people in the room, a diverse group of stakeholders, including past litigants and community members, as well as the experts and providers, and having conversations, doing all of this wonderful mapping and strategic work that goes into systems design and service design. And it's not just being reactive to the vendors and what they're barraging with kind of sales pitches, but it means kind of someone taking that stewardship role and calling together groups on a specific vertical. So whether it's around certain kinds of family disputes or even certain kinds of family disputes in the Bay Area of California, you need to have that multi-stakeholder group convening to actually come up with a legitimate vision of the future that people will buy into, and then working together to set a market and kind of set that common agenda. But that it's not quick, and it can't be one vendor or one firm or court setting that agenda. It needs to be a multi-stakeholder effort.
Yeah, and I love this idea of not just looking at legal services, but we should also re-examine the law in general. What is the law doing? Is it okay to have 300 different jurisdictions that we now technically can comply each one of their idiosyncratic rules, but is this society we want to live in, or should we be doing things differently?
Yeah, I agree with that. Just to add on, I'm not as pessimistic. I do think there are fundamental core principles in what we're seeking in a legal system that haven't changed, aren't going to change, and will not change, right? Whether it's transparency, democratic access to justice, full accessibility, like those should always be our principles. So whatever we design now, 20 years from now, we should just have those principles in mind and build the tech stack, build the rules to do that. Completely agree with Dan that it's all about stewardship. A little bit disagree. Like, I actually don't think we'll get kind of a top-down approach to all this. I do think it's going to be a ground-up, right? And and once it proves value, I think we'll get momentum. But it is going to have to be ground-up. And we're seeing courts, for example, judges on panels like deciding to implement AI in their own courtrooms, right? Using AI to parse through forms or to get through intake quicker, right? And I think we have to build those tools at the ground level to make it work. And then once everyone realizes the benefit and quality, that's where you get kind of the top-down approach. But I do think it's very much a grassroots approach at this point.
That's great. And the last question goes to Judge Campos.
Thanks, Harry. So how did you all solve the issue of deep fakes and fabricated evidence, which keeps me up at night in a state trial court where people have disputes about family drama, money drama, business drama, all sorts of drama? How did you solve deep fakes?
Anyone in this room?
Yes. Well, I mean, one thing, we updated the chain of custody and authentication, put the burdens on various folks to, prove the legitimacy of their own evidence. That helped a little bit.
Is that blockchain coming back in there?
Yeah. No, the chain of custody is different. Yeah, we put it on the blockchain.
Harry, may I close with a final sort of comment that I was having as this panel was going on, which is that I felt better in terms of the role of humans. Because I just went through a situation Thursday night. I'm at a dinner, and my sister, who's a professor at a university, is texting me furiously. One of her graduate students has been advised that her visa is revoked instantaneously. They want good legal advice. What do they do? I'm sitting in Massachusetts. I was previously licensed in California. I can't practice law, but I'm able to find them someone in Pennsylvania, and they've got a list together of a group of lawyers who will help. But it's like, how do you then go, which one of those lawyers is the right one to go to? And don't just go to the one that's closest to you in your town. And anyway, so it made me feel better that it's always about who do you trust and who do you get your info for. And whenever I've had medical issues to deal with, I've always gone back to my friends who went into medicine who I've known since college. I trust them. I trust their work ethic. I trust their intellectual capacity. And it's always going to go back to who do you trust for judgment.
I couldn't agree more. I think the driver for the entire industry is trust, right? And I think if we were to look ahead 20 years, I think the question that we're all trying to figure out now, various parts of the ecosystem, is what does it mean to be a trusted advisor in an AI-enabled world, right? And that question, when you unpack it, has so many layers that are other than technology, right? And I think that's the journey that we're about to go on over the next several years.
Any final words?
Thank you for putting up with me while I've been moaning.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I agree with you, Judge Campos. I think trust in humanity is really, the most important issue underlying all of this. So please join me for thanking our terrific panel here.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Harry, for running an amazing panel.